doesn't amplify, so speak into the, okay. Again, I'm Eric Barassa. I'm the Director of Transportation Planning with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. I want to thank you all for coming this morning. Today we're going to have a presentation from the Massachusetts Department of Transportation about their Project Mobility concept, which is a concept of widening Route 3 and introducing sort of a managed toll lane. And they're going to talk in more detail about this. This is an idea that is of the Public-Private Partnership Commission, which is a commission that is looking at sort of innovative ways to fund transportation infrastructure. And so what we'd like to do today is they're going to give about a 15-minute overview of this concept, and then we have plenty of time for question and answer. So I'd really like to ask people if you could hold your questions until after the presentation. There'll be plenty of time to get into details about this, and I will help try to moderate that. And that's really the purpose of today, is really for MassDOT to give an overview of this concept and really hear feedback from you all as municipal officials, planning staff, interested parties in these issues. So at this point, what I'd like to do is introduce Dana Levinson, who is the Chief Financial Officer for the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, and he will give a little introduction and introduce some of the team of consultants who have been working on this.
Thank you very much, Eric. Good morning. My name is Dana Levinson. I am the Chief Financial Officer for the Mass DOT. I've been in that position for a little bit over 3 years, and I am very glad to see the end of the winter in being here in the town of Hingham, where I've never been before, even though I was born and raised in Worcester, Massachusetts, where I currently live. We are here to discuss Route 3 South, which we call Project Mobility. And the goal of this project is to have a safer, less congested Route 3 South that reduces travel times and congestion. That's it in a nutshell. However, I want to caution everybody and say that nothing has been decided. We are exploring all the different options. We want to absolutely be sure as we can possibly be, which is never 100%, that this project will work out the way we want it to, which, as I said, is a safer, less congested Route 3 South. Before going on, I just want to introduce some of my own colleagues from Mass DOT. Owen Kane, who is Associate General Counsel for Mass DOT. Diane Madden and Dave White, if you can raise your hands, from MassDOT Environmental. I don't believe any more of my colleagues are in the room. If they are, please raise your hand. But in any case, we are here to answer your questions. I'm going to turn this over momentarily to Darren Comboy to talk about the specifics of the project. He's from Jacobs, and they are the experts in design and engineering. Again, nothing has been decided, other than the fact that this will be a tolled facility, but always with a free option. The general purpose lanes remain. The idea is that there is a tolled lane, one or two, and again, we are still in the process of trying to figure out which is the best option. Either a single lane option in either direction or a two-lane reversible, reversible in the morning and in the evening to accommodate traffic. But it will be a tolled facility because frankly it's the only way that we could afford it. There have been other managed lanes, and we're calling ours an express toll lane, but there are other facilities like this that have been built throughout the country and frankly throughout the world to varying degrees of success. Some very successful, some not so successful, some where the success is still being assessed. The most recent project is the I-495 Capital Beltway project, a 17-mile managed lane that opened in November of 2012 and is becoming more successful as time goes on, as people get used to the concept. It started off slowly, but it is the most recent one, and if you simply Google express toll lanes or managed lanes in the United States, you come up with a huge number of entries that shows you the lists of toll lanes that have come about. And again, they have come about primarily under the aegis of a public-private partnership. And the reason why is because, number one, there is not... Yes?
We do not have any sound system in this room.
Okay,
Other than the television.
so I need to talk louder.
Yes.
I'd be glad to. I'd be glad to, and I can. Where I was that in terms of other express toll lanes, they have been built, they have been running. There are none in Massachusetts. There are none in New England. There have been toll lanes in Texas, in California, in Florida. And again, they've been built primarily under the aegis of public-private partnerships. Number one, because there is not enough funding available for these projects from the traditional sources, whether it's federal aid or non-federal aid. And the other reason is that there are private sector investors who would like to invest in these toll lanes because they supply a return to them after they are finished with financing them, building them, and operating them. And the idea here is that if we can supply that service and make your lives easier in terms of congestion, in terms of safety, and the safety aspect is something that is extraordinarily important to Mass DOT and should be extraordinarily important to you, then we think that we will have been successful. Before I turn this over to Darren, I just want to give you the etymology of this deal. Where did it come from? About 2.5 years ago, MassDOT was approached with what was almost an unsolicited bid, but not quite, by a group of people who said that they think that a managed toll express lane on Route 3 South would be good for the Commonwealth and good for them. They were investors. We hadn't given it much thought. It actually was looked at about 10 or 12 years ago and then not considered further because there wasn't enough money for it. But at around the same time, again, this was 2.5 years ago, we also thought that the idea of a public-private partnership to finance this, and as a procurement methodology that was untraditional, that this actually might be an appropriate way to procure this particular project. We also came to realize that in our enabling legislation at Mass DOT from 2009, there was the provision for the Public-Private Partnership Commission. That commission has been meeting for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years this March. It has reviewed many projects, not many, it's reviewed 8 projects and will continue to review more, but the Public-Private Partnership Commission was set up to vet and put forth eventually contracts on behalf of the Commonwealth that would be the procurement methodology for these particular projects. This is one of 3 projects that the PPP Commission, or P3 Commission, has thought would be appropriate because all the different details of this particular transaction fit underneath the public-private partnership rubric. The 2 other projects that we're pursuing as well, and again, nothing has been decided, is a third crossing over the Cape Cod Canal, again, to increase safety as well as reduce congestion. And then the third project, which is smaller but also quite interesting, is the idea of enhancing rest stops on the highway system in Massachusetts, not on the I-90 corridor, but on the rest of the state highways that exist. And we're identifying properties, and we're hopeful that that will result in more amenities for drivers as they use the state highways. Again, nothing has been decided. This is outreach that we feel compelled to do because we want to do it. We can't get this project done without doing the outreach. Please ask us as many questions as you can after the presentation that's made, but don't expect necessarily that we're going to have definitive answers for you. What we're hopeful also about is that your questions and your concerns will inform us as to the directions that we need to go in as we pursue this project. So with that, I want to turn it over to Darren.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, my name is Darren Comboy. I'm with Jacobs Engineering. We were retained by Mass DOT to provide engineering and environmental support for this feasibility study. There are separate firms looking at the traffic and revenue portion of it and also the financial aspects So we're, as a team, we're trying to look at whether this project truly is feasible from all of those. Does it provide the benefits? Is it financially sound? And will it make sense to private investors going forward? All those questions are still certainly up in the air, and as Dana said, we don't have the answers to everything, but one of the first parts of the process, and to be able to move the project kind of to the next stage, the project needs to get on the long-range transportation plan. So part of the purpose today is to introduce the project because the update to the long-range transportation plan is coming up, and we certainly would like to get the project on that plan so that FHWA will initiate the environmental reviews that are necessary. If it's not on the long-range plan, they won't do it. So the crucial next step for us is to get the concept onto the long-range plan. So as Dana said, we're still in a very early stage, and we're probably not going to have all the answers because we just have not gotten that far in the study yet. But I'll try to give a basic overview of where we are now, and hopefully that'll generate some questions. We've already received some questions in advance, so we'll try to answer those as best we can, and the ones we can't, we'll be forthright and tell you that we don't have the answer yet. So what is Project Mobility? Dana talked about it. We're looking at the feasibility of adding toll lanes, express toll lanes to Route 3, basically from exit 12 up through the Braintree split. And also, one of the important aspects is also to make a connection to 93 South and 128. One of the aspects that we saw, from the existing traffic data is there's a significant portion of the total traffic northbound in the morning that is actually going to 93. So being able to accommodate that movement is almost as important or equally as important as providing a better connection to the Southeast Expressway. And similarly, in the afternoon, the split of the traffic is about the same. There's a significant amount of traffic coming from 128 that's going south, and to be able to pick up that traffic and move it into an express lane will have benefits not only for the users of that lane, but also for the general purpose lanes that don't take advantage of it. It's going to reduce traffic on the general purpose lanes. In general, these new lanes would be built in the median. And on the southerly end of the project, where we have a nice wide median, they would go essentially within the existing median today. And then as you get north, Weymouth and into Braintree, where the median is narrower, it'll require widening, but the lanes will still be in the center of the roadway. As Dana said, we're looking at initially two options. One is a two-lane reversible facility. Essentially, you would have two lanes that would go north in the morning, and right now we're looking at not just the rush hour, not like the HOV lanes where it's only a 3-hour window, or this would be from something like 1 in the morning till 11 in the morning. There would be gates that would come down and change the ramp configuration, and in the afternoon, from say 1 in the afternoon till nighttime, it would turn to southbound lanes. So that's one option. The second option is to build one express toll lane northbound and one southbound fixed. That you would just get into those. They'd be available 24/7. And I'll show you in a couple of minutes the subtle differences between the two, but operationally it would be one lane in each direction versus two lanes that reverse. Initially, our thought is all the toll lanes would be free for buses, and certainly the idea of increasing bus service and providing an expanded bus service because of these lanes being available is one of the goals or the objectives that would come out of this. As I mentioned, the objectives, and Dana's talked about them already, we certainly want to improve mobility, and sitting in traffic is not fun for anyone, and people certainly want to do less of that. Safety is a huge part of this, and I'll show you the information about that. But one of the factors is being able to restore the active breakdown lane back to its original use, which is an emergency breakdown lane. FHWA, for those of you who've been around for a while, granted MassDOT temporary use of the breakdown lane as a measure to deal with the congestion that exists today. But that was not meant to be a permanent solution. So MassDOT's charge is to come up with a permanent solution for that and not to continue to use the active breakdown lane. And I think I'll show you that, that the traffic or the accident information shows there are more accidents when the active breakdown lane is in use. I mentioned we also want to enhance the bus transit service. And because of the concept of P3, this is potentially a project that could get built with private funds and some limited state contribution that wouldn't otherwise be able to be built. There aren't enough federal and state dollars to build the entire project, and that's why some of it never moved forward, as Dana mentioned previously. As we said, safety is certainly the key issue, and the crash rates show that there's higher crash rates when the active breakdown lane is in use. In the southbound direction, it shows 17% more crashes in the areas where the active breakdown lane is in use as opposed to when it's not, and 37% more crashes in the northbound direction. So that would be a significant benefit brought about by the project. The other thing is that each of the interchanges, essentially within the project limits, are listed on MassDOT's high crash location list in the top 5%. So being able to also address some of those issues at the same time will also have another benefit of reducing crashes at each of those locations. So I said that the project essentially goes as we envision it right now, starting north of exit 12 and north of the North River, essentially. And then you would, the express lanes would continue north up through the Braintree split with a connection to the Southeast Expressway as well as to 93 South. And I'll show a little bit closer what some of the existing conditions today are. In the south, this is where we have the wide median. As I mentioned, it's approximately 100 feet wide. So all of the new construction could be accomplished in that median. And for those of you who were involved with the earlier Adelane study, which was looking at adding lanes from exit 11 up to exit 16 and essentially putting the third travel lane, all that work was also going to be done in the median. So it's very similar in approach. The amount of new construction will be bigger because of the type of facility this is, but basically the work would be done in the median. There's 6 existing mainline bridges that would be replaced and rehabilitated as part of this. 3 existing local road bridges that go over Route 3 would also be replaced. So one of the other benefits that come out of this project is, and I'll show it in more detail, is essentially being able to improve the state of good repair for all of the facility between exit 12 and the Braintree split. Most of the bridges are over 50 years old. They would all be rehabilitated and brought up to current standards. And also down in this area, obviously, we have the 4 active lanes, 2 in each direction, and the active breakdown lane. As we go north, between exit 14 and 16, it's really the transition area between the wide median and down to the narrow median in Weymouth. Generally, it's going from about 50 feet, from 100 feet down to 50 feet. There are other bridges, 2 more mainline bridges and 3 more local road bridges that would be affected by the new construction. The third general purpose lane starts in this area going northbound, but southbound it ends obviously at exit 16. or just south of that. And then up in the north section, from we're defining as exit 16 up to the Braintree split, there are, this is where the median is the narrowest. It's only 18 feet, basically just the Jersey barrier and 8-foot shoulders on either side. So there's certainly not enough room to build the facility that we're talking about within that 18-foot strip. So widening would have to occur to the outside of this, in this section of the roadway. There's a total of 10 mainline bridges in this area that would be affected, and 4 local road bridges that would also be impacted. And I know that I think that the obvious question is, we're just going to go faster and then we're just going to bog down at the Braintree split again. So one of the real challenges as the design moves forward and as the concept moves forward is how to make sure that doesn't happen. If people don't get the benefit, they're not going to use the facility. So integral to what this final solution would be is making improvements at the Braintree split so that the people that use this lane and also the general purpose lane realize the real benefits of that. If they don't have a time savings, they're not going to use it. So we need to make sure that that transition in the Braintree split works much better than it does today. And obviously that project is a separate project identified on the long-range plan now for, in the out years, I think it's 2031, 2035. But we would be able to incorporate a lot of the ideas that have been identified for improving the Braintree split as part of this project. So that's an integral part of making this a success. So this is in concept, what the 2-lane reversible scheme would look like. And in the south section, as I mentioned, where we have a wide median, the 2 new lanes, and this is the 2-lane reversible, would go in the middle of the median. The existing lanes would essentially stay just as they are today, except that the shoulder would not be an active breakdown, would not be active in rush hour any longer. That would be replaced by this service. The area in between, you need obviously to get in and out of these lanes, and that area would be used at the locations where we identify ingress and egress locations to transition people from the left travel lane over into these lanes. All those details, we don't have all of them here to get into that level of detail, but if you're interested, I did bring a photograph of what it looks like on the I-95 project, the Capital Beltway project, and how that works.
Darren, can I just interject for
Sure.
1 second? Your comments about the design are extraordinarily important. We have to be confident about the design where it works such that travel times are reduced, but as important, the private side needs to be convinced as well, because if the private side is not convinced, they're not going to invest. So keeping that in mind, that as far as the specifics of the project are concerned, that the design indeed does work to reduce congestion and to add safety is is of paramount importance, frankly. Because again, if the private side is not convinced and therefore does not invest, there's no project.
Thanks. And the top cross-section looks like, that's what it would look like essentially from exit 16 north, and there wouldn't be any extra room in the median. We'd fill it up completely, and shoulders on both sides so that if there is a breakdown, it can pull off. And unlike the HOV lane where there is not room for a safety shoulder, here this facility would have proper shoulders so that emergency vehicles and breakdowns can get out of the way, and the general traffic can continue to use the facility and not block it. The single lane in each direction, as you can see, we would just put 1 lane northbound in the south and middle sections and 1 lane southbound. It doesn't look a whole lot different, but it'll function a little bit differently. Obviously, with the one lane, you can't pass anybody, so you're in that lane, and that's, it's moving along, but there's no opportunity to pass someone. And that's one of the factors that, in terms of the expected use of the lane, gets considered in the traffic studies is, would people use this facility more than the two-lane reversible? And I think, some of the initial numbers show that the two-lane reversible would generally generate more use than one lane in each direction. The actual impact or new construction width is almost the same. We're building 2 lanes and 2 shoulders. There's a little extra for putting a barrier between those lanes. So I think up in the north it might be 5 or 6 feet wider than the 2-lane reversible, but essentially it's the same impact in terms of the width of the road. And just some general information about how these managed lanes work. Essentially, the express toll lanes give drivers the flexibility to use them when they choose to. I live in the West, and I decide whether to use the Mass Turnpike whether I'm going to pay for it or I'm going to take another route when I don't feel like paying for it. And usually it's because I think I'm going to save time. So essentially the same concept is here. People will use these lanes if there's enough benefit, time savings benefit to them. And the research has found that drivers don't use them all the time. They make the decision, not every day, they're really in a rush. They need it for a certain reason. So all of that has to be factored in. And as Dana said, the private sector also has to be convinced that the use will be sufficient to make this a financially viable project, or they won't bid on it, essentially. We've done very preliminary traffic and revenue studies. They need to be much more detailed, but part of that goes along with, once the project is on the long-range plan, we can start to initiate those more detailed studies and make that commitment. We need to get the project kind of moving to the next stage before we can really get into the more detailed analysis of how these will work. And I think one of the questions that will obviously come up is how these lanes interact with the general purpose lanes, and is there congestion at each of the interchanges? All of that would have to be modeled in a more detailed traffic model than what's been done so far. CTPS has helped do some preliminary modeling, and Cambridge Systematics, who's the traffic and revenue firm, has done an initial look at how much use we think these lanes will get, and it's promising, but we certainly need to do more. And obviously, as I said, the traffic time savings must be significant enough for people to be willing to spend to use it. As we're envisioning this is unlike maybe the Mass Turnpike or Tobin Bridge and the Sumner Tunnels. This is not going to be one flat rate, 24 hours a day. It's time of day based. There's different options, but one is, there's one rate during rush hour and a lower rate in the non-rush hour time. So, it tries to keep attracting people to use it. That's the whole concept. And by them moving into that lane, it makes the traffic on the general purpose lanes also better. So it's a dual benefit for everyone that uses Route 3. Generally, the idea is to try to manage the toll lane volume so that it can at least maintain 45 miles an hour, and that number is not set in stone. It could be 50, but generally you want to be moving so that the amount of savings that you realize is significant. Excuse me, and that's the goal here. And if, as I said, we need to make sure that both ends of the facility work smoothly so that time savings is not then wiped out by sitting in traffic when you get to the end. We intend to use all electronic tolling, or that's what's envisioned, similar to what's being implemented on the Mass Turnpike. Obviously, you don't want to be going through a toll booth. That kind of kills the whole idea of being able to go at a normal speed. So we would use the same technology or similar technology that's being now implemented on the Turnpike and was just implemented on the Tobin Bridge. You just drive under at full speed, and cameras record, your presence there, and the Easy Pass system will record that you were there. Because we have the infrastructure or the back office facilities already in place with that all electronic tolling, we'll be able to take advantage of that, and that's one of the benefits, is using that same technology that we already have in place to be able to collect the tolls and get the information from the lanes. And I think, as Dana said, the toll pricing structure has not been established at this point. It's too early in the process to get to that level. Obviously there's some ideas, but we're not at the point where there's a high degree of confidence in what those numbers should be, and quite frankly, they'll change. The total cost of the project, all of those things have to be factored in. Other financing issues will all impact what those tolls will be, and people's willingness to pay. I mean, all of those factors get looked at in more detail as the project starts to advance.
So to presuppose your first question, we don't know how much this will cost the driver to drive on it.
In simple words.
We can speculate. You can look at what the experience has been, such as most recently with the Capital Beltway, where I think it was assessed after the first year, the tolls ranged anywhere between 25 cents and several dollars, with the average toll being around $1.63. It gives the number of cars that were driving on the facility. But again, we don't know exactly what it will cost the driver to use this facility. But keep in mind that tolling technology has become so advanced over the past several years that if we were to go the dynamic tolling route, where the price could change at any time, depending on what the volume is. The idea is that you want to keep a constant safe volume of traffic going through these toll lanes at all times, for which these drivers would pay. And the idea is that it's always at a specific mileage per hour. We're talking 45 miles an hour right now. If there's capacity, the price may go down. And again, this is the dynamic tolling model, and there are several places that are using that right now. There are others that are fixed time of day, but that's not quite as technologically advanced as a dynamic tolling model. But the idea is to keep that traffic going through that facility as to the right volume, the highest volume possible at the safest speed. And again, if that happens, the expectation is that the general purpose lanes would also be moving faster.
Thanks. The environmental issues, are certainly significant along this corridor, and we've had the opportunity at Jacobs to be involved with the earlier study. I think Marianne Magna, that's here today, has been working on this since 19. Oh, please don't say that. It's a long time. We'll just leave it at that. And so we're very familiar with the resources and the sensitive nature of the resources along the corridor. And in general, there are wetlands along the entire corridor, both associated with river and stream crossings, but also just separate pockets of wetlands. A lot of them are in the median, but also on the sides of the road. So we're very familiar with the area from exit 12 up to exit 16, but there's also maybe a little less as you go north of exit 16, but there's still some certainly through Braintree, Manadequat River for one, that all have to be looked at and paid attention to. There's also, I think, one of the other factors that's not unique, but certainly an issue for this corridor in particular are the water supplies. And there's a number of water supply protection zones within the corridor, both associated with groundwater wells as well as surface water reservoirs. And I have some plans that I'll just show you in general what those are. And And then also priority habitat, particularly in the southerly end of the corridor. As we've talked about, what's envisioned is that the majority of this work will be done in the median and certainly within the existing right-of-way. Typically, just for information, from the southerly end up through probably Union Street, the width of the right-of-way is about 300 feet. So the state owns, enough property in that whole section to be able to build the additional facility needed. But there are going to certainly be unavoidable impacts to the median. The previous study that we worked on, identified that there were going to be, several acres of wetland impacts. We would expect that the same thing would happen here. Variance to the Wetlands Protection Act certainly going to be needed, and we'll have to work, closely with all of the conservation commissions and state DEP to work out the appropriate mitigation for that. One of the ideas or thoughts that this project would also allow for, though, is improvements to some of the wildlife passages along the corridor. And we envision that all the existing culverts, for example, would be replaced. And that would give an opportunity to provide more, current thoughts on wildlife passages through those culvert areas. Stormwater management, we're going to be able to make improvements and bring it up to current standards, so that would be a benefit. And also the potential for noise barriers. We've done a very conceptual level look at the demand for or the need for noise barriers and identified areas where they certainly may be justified. We need to do the full noise study as part of the next phase, but certainly the earlier study identified sections that would noise barriers would have been justified, and we would anticipate that this project will follow through with that, and there'll be a number of locations that will qualify for noise barriers. So these are just some maps from using the MassGIS database, and the green, solid green shading is areas of wetlands that are identified. There's certainly more wetlands than what are just identified in the MassGIS database, but this at least gives you a sense of how many or how much is out there. The crosshatched area is, the blue crosshatched area are the water supply protection zones, and the orange areas are the priority habitat zones. So in the south section, you can see we pretty much have all of those elements present, and we're certainly well aware of the need to be sensitive to those. In the middle section, a little bit different, but still certainly the water protection, water supply protection areas. There's still here and here. More wetlands. The wildlife habitats are not as identified, at least right adjacent to the corridor, but we'll be updating those and certainly making sure that there's nothing that's missed. And then in the north section, again, we have the Manatequit River along one side, and because of the connection to 93 South, and again, what we're envisioning is we need to get beyond the Granite Street interchange to make that connection back to 93. So the limit of work would actually go about to the town line between Quincy and Braintree on 93 to be able to make that transition into the managed lane. So the limit of work would be somewhere down in this area, right, getting close to the Great Cedar Swamp, and obviously in that area we'll certainly be just staying within the median and not going outside of the median. So one of the things that we wanted to touch on was, as I mentioned, one of the goals of this meeting was to give the coalition enough information to, be able to discuss and vote on whether the project's appropriate for the long-range transportation plan. So we wanted to at least highlight what we think are some of the elements of the project that are consistent with the MPO's goals. And the first being safety, and I think we've talked about that in detail, but certainly safety improvements are a paramount part of the project. Capacity management and mobility are also, obviously, as Dana has said, and I've tried to emphasize, is a key part of this, so that not only for the people who are using the toll lanes, but the general purpose lanes will see a benefit. The early traffic studies that we've done show that the traffic in the general purpose lanes goes down because they've been shifted over into the managed lane, so or the express toll lane, so that the level of service actually will improve on the general purpose lanes as well, improving the mobility not only for the people using the toll lane, but also for the people using the general purpose lanes. We've talked about the opportunities for expanded bus service. This certainly, with a faster trip into Boston, the feasibility of expanding bus service is, would be a big benefit of the project. And then the other ancillary benefit is that this, as the preliminary traffic is showing, will take traffic off of the other congested arterials. It'll put people back on Route 3 that might be avoiding Route 3 right now. And so there'll be a benefit also in reduced congestion on the other adjacent arterials in the corridor. I mentioned system preservation, and that's another key element of the MPO's goals. One of the benefits of this is that it'll bring the entire corridor into a state of good repair. Part of the requirements will be that at the end of the lease agreement, and the length of that time is still not determined, but I think 30 to 50 years is the type of range that typically we'd be talking about, that the P3 team has to turn the facility back over to MassDOT in a state of good repair. There's 27 bridges that would be replaced or rehabbed. All of those bridges would likely have to be replaced or rehabbed in this time period. So essentially, that work is getting done earlier and as part of this project. So we're able to achieve, rather than doing all those projects piecemeal as money is available, we can do them in all one big project. There's substandard clearances under all of the bridges, so all of the bridges that pass over Route 3 would have improved clearances. New pavement on the existing Route 3 would also be part of this, so that even the existing roadway will be improved. Obviously, the new technology for signing will be an integral part of this, and then, as I mentioned, the roadway drainage system will be modernized. So there's a number of significant impacts that are significant improvements that will be realized under system preservation. And then one of the other major goals of the MPO is economic vitality. By modernizing and expanding Route 3, we're able to improve access to existing employment centers and homes on the South Shore. We're reducing the auto and bus rider time, and we're also addressing something the Chamber of Commerce has seen as an issue, is that the South Shore is hampered by mobility issues, and this project would help to maybe change that opinion. So one of the things that I also, in terms of other benefits, is that when we replace the local road bridges that go over 93, we'll also be able to build them to meet the new complete streets requirements for MassDOT and the Commonwealth, be able to put bike lanes and full sidewalks and make the improvements that you would expect and hope for. So that's, again, another benefit of getting all this work done as part of one large project. We're a little hesitant to come out and show you exact numbers at this point, and as Dana said, there are no exact numbers, but just as a first pass, we're estimating that the construction duration, it would be about 4 years, but one of the benefits that using the P3 process is typically the private sector can come up with more innovative ways to build things faster. They certainly want to get the facility online quicker so that they're generating revenue. So we've put in 4 years. It could easily be something less than that. There's a lot of work to be done. There would, it's a 17-mile corridor that would be being worked on. So, and as I said, 27 bridges. So there's a significant amount of work, and we have to keep the traffic moving during that time. The very preliminary estimate, and obviously at this point we don't even have survey plans, so this is a little bit more than a back of envelope estimate, but it's still just to give a range of where we think the total costs are, somewhere between $600 and $800 million. And obviously there's a lot that has to go into this before we can get that number pinned down any closer than that.
Derek, if I could just interject one more time.
Sure.
Won't be the last.
He's my boss, so.
To put that number in context of 600 to 800 million, our annual federal aid coming from the Federal Highway Administration annually is roughly around $583 million. So that should give you an idea of the difference, and therefore, if we're at $583 million roughly for our annual federal aid, the idea of it coming out of the federal aid budget is impossible, and it is also impossible out of our non-federal aid budget. But again, that's the part of the reason, if not a lot of the reason, as to why we're pursuing this under a public-private partnership, because again, that capital would be supplied by the private side, again, for a reasonable return, and we can talk about what reasonable is, and that dialogue is continuing in the market as investors decide whether they want to invest in projects around the country and around the world.
One of the things, and just I guess to put it in context a little bit, our very preliminary estimate for the bridge work alone is around $150 million. So if you think about, that's money that would have been spent to replace those bridges sometime in the next 30 years, that this is not all just money just for the construction of the toll lanes. It's also taking into account some of the state of good repair projects that would normally come about through over the next period of time. And as we've mentioned that, for this project to really move forward and to allow the federal environmental reviews to go forward, it has to be on the long-range transportation plan. So we need to take that first step. And this, as we've been talking about, is a little bit different because it's a project that wouldn't be taking money from the federal allocation. It's private money and some state money likely to be put in. That is not part of the normal projects that it wouldn't impact the other projects that are already on the plan. We've been part of this initial feasibility study that's been going on. The next step would be for MassDOT to go out for a procurement for environmental and engineering services to do the next level of detail. Essentially the environmental impact report on the state level and environmental assessment or environmental impact statement on the federal level, and 25% design. Start to develop it in more detail and be able to answer more questions. We're hoping that process will start later this year. And this really is kind of the beginning of the public outreach, and certainly will be continuing. This wasn't meant to be one time we come and talk to you and then you don't hear from us again. There'll be a lot of opportunities, and we'll certainly come back and provide more information and get your feedback. I guess at this point we can open it to questions. I also put on here there's a email address that if you want to have if you have questions and you don't get a chance to ask them today, you can send them to that email address, and we will get them and be able to respond to those. So with that, I guess we'll turn it back to Eric.
very much. So I'm going to try to facilitate these, just the Q&A, and just for the purpose of trying to capture this for the cable access, I'm just going to try to repeat your questions so that the listening audience at home can catch that. So at this point, why don't we just open up? I know we have a couple state representatives here. There's Rep. Cantwell. I think Rep. DeCosta is here, and Rep. Deal. So maybe if the state representatives have some first questions.
Sure. I don't want to have my back.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to do that, that's fine.
Just want to say, thank you for the presentation. This is my first time to be learning about the proposal, so really my comments are more preliminary. Definitely would want to do some written comments after learning and hearing from people here today. First of all, I know the South Shore Coalition. I want to thank Ann Burbine for putting things together here, because I know the South Shore Coalition was created in the 80s by Bill Golden and others who are here today. And one of the major purposes was to look at transportation improvements and protecting water and the like. I would note that my predecessor, Frank Hines, served for 26 years and was looking at ways to improve Route 3 for all 26 years. And here we are. My concern, I have several concerns. My first thing is jotting down in some questions, because I am concerned about some of the things. The minute we have tolls, once tolls are there, they're there forever. But I do want to note that you have a very important job to do, and at least to give us options. And what I want to make sure is we're exploring every option. I do want to note, first of all, the reasons why we need options to improve Route 3, just our impact on quality of life. I drive Route 3 every day, back and forth into Boston, and I can attest. I represent, by the way, Marshfield and Scituate, and residents in my towns. It is one of the primary things people talk about when they say things that impact our quality of life, the amount of time it takes to get in and out of Boston. So clearly, I think we all want to look at ways to make improvements here. I would note, too, the South Shore Chamber of Commerce with Peter Foreman have been doing a lot to try to help to bring business down to the entire South Shore. And I do note that they always say that there is this impression that it's a tough area to get to, and that they are looking for ways to do investment. So a couple concerns. One is our regional strategy up until now. We always were talking about ways of investing for public transportation. And I want to be careful that by incentivizing a toll road going in and out, I don't want that then to lose the incentive of our continuing to invest in public transportation. Clearly, your investors are going to say, well, we want more cars coming out. And indeed, one statement, we haven't met any of us, but one of the statements of saying, if we build it, they will come. We always get worried that every time we make improvements, Route 3, I think when Route 3 was finished, I think almost within 10 years it was beyond its capacity. So a concern that I have is here we'll build this toll road, and your statement, sir, when you're saying about attracting more drivers, that is a worry, because both for, I guess, for your investors and as well for me, from a point of view, is saying I really want to make sure we're making the emphasis on public transportation. It is a change, I know, in our mentality, because we like to get in our cars, we like our independence, but we put so much money into Greenbush, we put so much money into Old Colony, the idea of buses as well. Just want to make sure that we're not losing that kind of incentive, because I think that was one of the major issues that the South Shore Coalition was talking about at the very beginning of its founding. I have to tell you, I'm very skeptical of giving public property for any private use, so it's something I'd need to be learning from you all about. When you were talking the benefits of 27 bridges that would have to be repaired by the state, by all of us.
Not by the state.
Oh, I'm sorry, by whom?
By the investor.
Oh, no, I understand. No, I'm talking for options, because if this option is not one that's chosen, the state would be doing it, the taxpayers would be doing it. So that's something that I'd have to weigh as we try to price it out, to say, what would the cost be to me, to all my constituents, to all of us here? So we're weighing, is that a benefit? We'd really want to know for people, since you're using the median, so I'm thinking of the drivers who can't afford the tolls. Would this in any way hamper them? So if we're taking space now, it looks like if it's the median, then it's not, they can still be able to drive and they're not going to have the additional cost. But will that slow down their drive? That's something I want to hear some of from the experts back about, saying, well, what about the person who couldn't afford the tolls? Is this somehow going to make it harder for them to get in and out? Let's see, you did a great job. Because I was writing down, how long would this take to complete? You've expressed that it would be 4 years. What would the cost be? That was one question I wrote down that I heard you say $600 to $800 million. I'd like to know how much state money you're thinking about for this, because you are correct. One of the hardest things, I know everyone always would say, gee, we'd much prefer, we don't want tolls. None of us want tolls. And people will always say back to me, why can't we just build and have the state pay for it? So I think part of the lesson has been the reason why so many of our roads and bridges have not been maintained to the level we want is there just isn't enough money to go around. But you answer the question. Of course, then I look as a state official. I say, gee, how much is out there for federal money? And you just were helping to answer that. Do we have any expectation of the federal government changing national policy to try to help with these kinds of things? Because this is going on all around the country.
The federal government is very encouraging of public-private partnerships because they see it as a way to replace and supplement funds that are extraordinarily limited on the part of the federal government. So from a national point of view as well as from a local point of view when it comes to the FHWA, and we've met with both, they are very encouraging about pursuing this particular route. That's not necessarily a concern, but if you said, what are your expectations for federal funding going forward in general, it's not going to go up. There's a bill right now that's being put forth by the President that we were talking to people in Washington yesterday with the FHWA, and we don't know what's going to happen to that bill. That's the Surface Transportation Reauthorization, which is a multi-billion dollar bill. We don't know what's going to happen with that. What we do know is that we get a certain amount of federal aid every year, which is 80% to our 20% match. That's not going to go up in the future. That's pretty much assured. And that money is completely programmed for other projects.
That's interesting, because you said the $583 million, that's the total amount we get from the federal government for all transportation?
For surface transportation, for highway.
Okay. No,
Yes.
that's important, because...
That's not FTA, that's not transit, that is highway.
Great. So just final things then from me. One, I think, and unfortunately you've already said they're preliminary. We don't know how much state money, so my beginning point is starting with this, knowing that we want to see Route 3 improved. I'm just incredibly skeptical of giving public property for private investors. I do appreciate then your testimony, what you were saying is that it would revert back to the state. So I'd have to ruminate on that. But losing the breakdown lane, I understand, as you were saying, I think one of you was saying for safety purposes that it wasn't supposed to be forever. I do note, by the way, driving every day, there are people driving faster than I do in a breakdown lane as going by, so certainly something we don't want to encourage. But my concerns, what I'll do is do some follow-up comments to you in writing. I'm so concerned that we don't disincentivize public transportation investments. Looking at those issues, I certainly want to think of the average driver, as I said, who wouldn't be able to afford this. But I look forward to hearing from others. I know from my towns, I'm really pleased. I saw Greg Emon, my town planner from Marshfield. I saw Laura Harbottle, town planner from Situate. So I know some very thoughtful people who I look forward to learning from here this morning, too. I do apologize to folks. I know that this is running till 10:30 or 11 at the latest. Okay, good. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Maybe just one clarification on your point about turning over. This will be essentially a lease agreement with the...
That's correct.
Mass DOT retains ownership of the land.
Yes.
And one of the other benefits that, and again, the numbers will hopefully will bear this out as we get, as it gets more detailed, but that people who want to get to, say, Quincy Adams Station, this could be a real benefit for them because they'll be able to use it, get off to the station faster than they would have, without this facility. So it may encourage, more use of particularly the Red Line. And I know that's, it's already pretty heavily used, but there is certainly potential for people not just to use it to get to Braintree faster.
It's also expected that, and we are very cognizant of the idea of public transportation being encouraged alongside this particular project. And to that end, we've discussed the concept that buses would be going for free in the managed lane. And that certainly would be a boon to public transportation. We would think it would encourage people if they can get in faster via bus. But we're very much about mode shift. We want to see people, despite the fact that, yes, the private side would like to see as many cars as possible go through there, through the managed lane, but we are very much aware and very much driven by the idea of mode shift to public transportation. And the last comment that I make is that in terms of this being turned over to the private sector, as Darren just said, it is a lease, and it does come back to the idea is that it would be written into the contract that it does come back to the state in the exact same condition as when it was built. And it is the responsibility of the private sector to turn it over in that exact same condition. So they would need to be making continual investment in this particular asset. So that should give you some comfort, but also the idea is that it is the private sector's risk on this situation. If they build it and it's not successful because people aren't using it, it's their risk, not the state's. But that's why we also have to be incredibly confident about this design, which has not been finally decided at all, that it is going to indeed improve congestion times and drive times to and from Boston.
All right, I appreciate that. And just one of your points of saying not just moving the clock further up to Braintree, because we've heard that every time. People are saying, well, if it just we save a few minutes, but then we still end up in the same amount of traffic, it's not worth either. It's not worth for the consumer who's really concerned about having tolls now for the first time on the South Shore, nor is it probably worth for the folks at UTAC from the investments. But clearly, as a state representative, I'm less concerned about the investors, clearly,
of course,
than I am just about.
Same here.
And think, as you would be, and for those drivers who just would never be able to afford this. So I do appreciate you giving us options. I think for myself, I want to ruminate on this. Definitely do some written comments, and then see what the other options could be as well. So I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much for presenting this today. Jeff Deal from Town of Whitman, and just have a couple questions. I know we're probably all going to get off to work, have our coffee if we haven't had it already. So a couple things. I want to sort of dispute my colleagues' just claim that there's not enough money to go around. People know I worked on the gas tax indexing question last year. 49% of the gas tax is diverted to public transportation, and that could be going towards roads and bridges. The RMV, for example, brings in $600 million with a cost of $60 million to run. So there's some money there that could be going into roads and bridges instead of being diverted to the MBTA. And on top of that, Massachusetts spends $675,000 per year per road mile versus the national average $145,000 per year per road mile, including New Hampshire, which spends around that amount. So we're spending $500,000 per road mile per year for our roads. I think that we potentially could be taking on this project without having to incur a private enterprise, and also potentially do it within our own operating budgets.
Can you speak up a little? I think that
Oh, sorry, can't hear me back there. So those are some of my initial concerns. The other thing is the private developer named? Is that company here? Not here.
They're not named. It has not. The private developer has not been named.
Okay.
We know that there are quite a few out there that are interested in this project, but that is not. We haven't gotten to that point.
So
yet
no
at all.
funds from a private developer have gone into any of the presentations or studies or anything like that? Okay. And this will obviously then go out to bid as a potential? I guess my other concern, too, is the timeline. We're talking about having public hearings after we've gone for federal procurement of funds to continue on with the project. I mean, this is not really even a public forum, right? This is sort of more of an informal. So when are we going to have actual public forums on this, I guess?
We will. I can't tell you that at this point.
Okay.
As part of the environmental process, we'll have very robust public outreach and public development process. That will be the next phase.
Okay. Will those forums be environmental only, or will they be involving cost impact to taxpayers? Everything. Okay. And when do you anticipate? Within a year?
Well, we're talking about procuring for the next consultant, and that's why we need to be on the long-range plan to start the federal and state environmental processes. The timing is a little bit uncertain, but it will be later in 2015, early 16.
Early 16? Okay. And is there currently an amount of investment already made into this project that we can identify? Any costs?
help me
Sure.
clarify. So some of the representatives' questions are about the sort of the timing and the public process for this. And this is just we're kind of, MassDOT has come out at the very beginning. This is the sort of the very conceptual nature of this. They haven't dedicated, there have been no decisions about dedicating actual infrastructure, funds to this. So this is kind of the first concept of this to get the feedback. And then the project manager, Diane Madden, from the Environmental Division at MassDOT, explained that that if this project were to move forward, there's a very defined sort of process for how the project gets evaluated for its environmental impact, and that typically leads the sort of public process for how public meetings happen and how there's more public engagement for that. So I just wanted to clarify that for the viewers at home.
Well, I appreciate that. I guess the only thing I'd comment is, private management of public assets isn't always a magic bullet. Look at Keolis and the MBTA right now is what I'd leave you with. So thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
So are there any other public officials, or maybe we can just open up to questions? Representative? Sure.
They told me to use the Omni Parade field voice, so I hope all you can sit there. First of all, gentlemen, thank you. I guess two questions come to mind that haven't already been pointed out. Number one, that's going to be available publicly, I assume, your presentation?
Rep, can you use the mic?
Yeah, you can use the mic, then.
All right. Well, will that presentation be available?
Yes.
Okay. The only other question I have is generally, what assurance can you folks give that this will not turn into another big dig? You've got 4 years of developing everything between Norwell and the Braintree split. I know that we're backed up way into Milton Square trying to get home if you leave Boston A time between 3:30 and 5:30, 6. How far back do you think are we going to be back to the O'Neill Tunnel with all this working? I mean, have you folks looked at the type of traffic patterns that this type of work would occur, would cause? And secondly, for the cynics among us, what type of assurances can you give that I remember Senator Kerry talking about what an efficient and what a great deal the big dig was going to be. What assurances can you give that figure you gave up there won't double or triple in the future? And I know that's broad, but do your best to answer it. Thank you.
The concept behind the public-private partnership, again, is that the money is coming from the private sector, and the contract that would be signed with the private sector entity that would be building the facility is finite. At least the way we would contemplate it, if they can't build it for that amount of money, they're either, one, not going to build it, or they're not going to bid on it.
Not to interrupt you, but what would happen if you get in the middle of this thing and you found your money is gone and it's only half done?
Again, I would say it's not our money. It's the money. The money is coming from the private sector, and the private sector would be obligated to build this under any circumstances. If they misbid it, they need to figure out a way to pay for it. That's the way the contracts have been written for managed lanes across the country, and that is the measure of protection. Again, we are not talking about federal funds. We're not talking about state funds.
So there's no possibility that this private contractor could go bankrupt and walk away and leave the state with traffic backed up to the gas tanks and an undone Southeast Expressway.
We would do.
I realize I'm throwing some difficult questions at you, but surely you must have anticipated something like this.
Yes.
And I'm just looking for an answer because I know I'm going to get asked those precise. I've already have been asked those types of questions.
To address one of the questions about the construction, obviously the requirements for any construction along this corridor would be, you have to maintain the same level of number of lanes, level of service that's there today. So they're not going to be able to take a lane out of service and just cause additional backups. The bridge construction all has to be done while maintaining the existing number of lanes. There may be a local road bridge that maybe we could use, or the P3 team would use innovative techniques like are being used around the state to do a rapid closure and a rapid replacement of that bridge. You know, all of those things, the innovation that the P3 teams can bring to the project, that's part of, you know, part of the benefits that the P3 process would bring is that the teams will want to do it as quickly and as efficiently and with as least impact as possible, because it will be costing them money if it doesn't. So, you know, we will put the requirements, or Mass DOT will put the requirements into the contract, you know, with the minimum traffic requirements during construction, similar to how I-95 Adelaide is being built today. You know, they have to maintain the same number of lanes through peak hours, and obviously there are times in non-peak hours at nighttime that work has to get done and they need to take a lane to build something, but you know, generally peak hours, you have to maintain the same level of service that's there today.
So let's see if there's any other questions from folks here. Yes, sir?
Yeah, hi, I'm Eric Hart. I'm the town accountant for the town of Rockland, as well as I serve on the SRA board for Southfield Redevelopment Authority. And we have something similar with private-public partnership with L&R that's over there now. And their main interest is to make a profit, which is that's what a corporation does. And it's not necessarily the same interest as the public trust, which is what our interests are. And I just caution as you move forward that you keep that in mind and make sure that you get performance bonds on this project from them, because you know, as one of the representatives previously mentioned, if they walk away from this and we're left with you know, an empty construction project that's halfway done, regardless of whether you tell us that it's their, you know, risk completely or not, we don't want to be looking at that for the rest of our you know, lives. And I just caution you on that, as well as the management of whoever's going to be doing this project, to go with someone who's been proven in other areas around the country that's done this type of project before, as opposed to possibly some political appointee that may not have the experience that would be required on a project of this size. And I also have fears with the estimates on this. I'm glad you're not talking about toll booths that are manned as opposed to the electronic system. I think they work great across the country from what I've seen. And I look forward to getting some information from you, hopefully on some of these other projects around the country and what you've done to research them. And I'm assuming you've got something to warn. Yes.
So for thank you for your comments. So I think for folks who have sort of lengthy comments and questions, I would just ask you to just come up to the microphone so that we can capture that. So I don't know if you guys have a response to any of those things. There's sort of a lot of comments in there.
I appreciate your suggestions.
A lot of concerns raised. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, this gentleman just raised a lot of concerns about sort of the public-private partnership.
Right. I can tell you that the industries, companies that have been looking at this, that have reached out, and it's been a one-way because they've been reaching out to us. We did talk to members of the industry back in October, but they are all very experienced. They haven't been qualified yet, and we'll go through a RFQ process, a request for qualifications process, which speaks to their financial and operational capacity to build and finance, build and construct, maintain and operate this facility. And I also appreciate your request about putting out information about other managed lanes that have taken place, and we're glad to do that. That's a very good point.
I just want to add one thing. Can I come up here? Have you looked at all the possibility of, I mean, if this project appears to do what you're heading into, and it looks like you're going to be expecting to bring in those type of tolls and usage of this, have you looked into just the conventional method of us going out and doing this and bonding it? If you believe the revenue's there and you can show that this revenue works across the country, why wouldn't we be doing this internally, unless your fears about the fact of this turning into another big dig are also the same type of fears? I just don't understand why. Was this the initial thought to immediately go with a public-private partnership, or did you think about the conventional method of financing this?
The conventional method of financing this would be without tolls. It would be a standard state procurement for which we do not have the capacity to issue bonds. If, however, and we are looking at this, if we were to look at this not as a public-private partnership, but where we would still put up the tolls and charge those tolls and have that secure the revenues, that's a possibility. On the other hand, that is the state taking the risk that this project will be successful as opposed to the private sector taking the risk. And yes, there is a price to pay the private sector for taking that risk in terms of what they make as a return. But we are still considering that aspect. We're not at the point where we think that is necessarily a viable one, but it's not like we have not given it any consideration.
Okay. Is there any information, by the way, on the amount of money that is brought in from tolls versus what it costs to maintain those same roads? Do you have those analysis at all?
Not for this particular project, but are you
any of the projects? Route 90, what it costs to maintain that versus what it takes in, stuff like that?
Absolutely, yes. We can get you that information very easily.
Thank you very much.
Cole from Norwell. I'd like to reiterate the statements that have just been made by the previous speaker and by Representative DeCoste. I would caution, I've got 2 points actually. The first is I would caution you that a public-private partnership is only as good as the private piece survives. And believe me, if the private piece discovers that it's going to cost $1 billion after doing their numbers to be profitable at, say, $600 million, they will go bankrupt, leaving you holding the bag. That is the way they get out of it. Even though you write an excellent contract which has legalities about their fulfilling their relationship and their responsibilities, if they go bankrupt, you have nothing to work with. I'm just cautioning the way the legalities of the contract are written with the public contributor to this. Because if they go bankrupt, they can walk away from any problem and dissolve themselves. And then we are back where we started from, potentially worse. With that aside, because I'm sure your legal people will think about that, I would just caution that we not write the contract the way it was presented initially. My second point is, as a resident of the South Shore, I have tremendous respect for the engineering that figures out where do these on and off ramps go. And having said that, malls in our country are dying. They don't seem to be functional anymore. However, the Braintree Mall, if you're coming from the South Shore, is the most dangerous exit you can possibly try to get to. You're coming from Route 3 and crossing 2 lanes of traffic that are coming out of Boston. And for a Route 3 car to get over to exit 35, you would love to look at the accident statistics for that specific exit. I notice your northbound section would appear to stop at the Braintree split. I don't know if you can go a smidgen on and consider that whole area as part of your improvements. So, my thoughts.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Joe Sheen. I work in the office of Senator Hedlund. Senator couldn't make it this morning, but he wanted me to make sure a member of his staff was here. But he is the ranking member on the Transportation Committee. He's been following this issue. Will continue to follow it as well. First of all, thank you for having this and really getting the opinion of the public on this. We put this on our Facebook page for this meeting and this event just to make sure that our constituents were aware that this event was coming up. We had over 200 people comment on that page, a lot of concerns, a lot of questions were raised, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't bring up some of them today. One of the biggest things that a lot of people had asked is to make sure that for the public hearing process that we try to make sure that it is during off-work hours. Obviously, we're talking about Route 3 right now. Most of our constituents have already taken that trip on Route 3 in the morning for their morning commute. For the future, that's one thing that we certainly would be appreciative of, and I think a lot of people across the South Shore would be grateful for that ability, like we all have today, to add some input on this event. Another concern that possibly we can kind of foresee is certainly there's a great potential for private enterprise to realize a lot more cost saving than if this were to be a public project. With that said, some of the private enterprises that we've partnered with on the public-private partnerships have actually not really realized some of those savings because they're still facing a lot of the same constraints that a lot of public projects are. Certainly Keolis comes to mind. Keolis hasn't done a great job with their commuter rail operation necessarily, but we've kind of changed some of the rules in the middle of the game to try to dictate the terms of how they're supposed to run their business. One of the things we'd be curious about is what assurances could we possibly have that this private enterprise was able to actually realize these savings not only in the construction but the overall operation of this project for it to actually get those savings. I can kind of very easily imagine a scenario whereby the legislature and the government kind of comes in and starts dictating the terms of how they can run their business after these deals have already been made. How, I guess, if you've seen these projects in other states, and I've experienced these projects in Virginia, they seem to work pretty well, actually. What has there been an experience of that where the public partnership has been able to come back, kind of start to dictate the terms of that, how they run their enterprise? Those are most of the concerns I have.
That rarely, if ever, happens. Okay. There have been, we'd be remiss if we didn't say there have been situations that have not worked out terribly well. The Indiana Toll Road comes to mind, and that was an entity that actually went bankrupt relatively recently, having been leased back in 2008. It's not a direct corollary because it was an existing asset that was leased to the private sector. The private sector, frankly, lost its investment. Now, the Indiana Toll Road, even though it went bankrupt under the private side, it kept on. It continues to operate and continues to operate quite well. It's not like, but this was not a build situation. This was something that already existed, and it was a situation where, in retrospect, the state actually did fairly well because it leased the toll road for 75 years for $3.8 billion in upfront proceeds. But not. That's probably the most extreme example of a transaction that went poorly. There are many more transactions, and again, I would point to the I-495 Washington Beltway project that was opened up in 2012 that has gone much better over the past 2 years than when it first started out. But there was a certain amount of ramp up where people had to get used to the idea that they are paying a toll, but they ended up becoming used to it because they paid a toll to go faster to get to where they want. That's the most recent example, and since these transactions have been taking place for about the past 20 or 25 years, we will have the benefit of lessons learned from many other transactions that have taken place, and as we continue to explore how best to effect this project to take place, that we will end up with as many assurances as we can possibly get that it will work, because we will again learn lessons from places where it didn't quite work as well.
Good morning. My name is Laura Harbottle. I'm the town planner for the town of Scituate. Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. I'm sure when you're involved with something like this, there are a lot of features that you have to take a lot of time on as far as the design. And one thing I was wondering about is, since I'm from working for the town of Scituate, when you are using this new lane, are you going to have to get on at the very beginning and then just go continuously through? You can't get on from other towns, say, exit 13, you'd be able to get on in approximately that location, or how would that work?
I didn't go into the detail. I actually have a plan that shows in concept where we think the entrances would be, and we're envisioning, again, this is the first pass, but coming northbound, 3 entrances, obviously at exit 12, 13, 14, those are where big volumes of traffic are entering Route 3. So, and then 3 locations where you could get off. and get out of the lane. And similarly, coming southbound, it wouldn't be just one place that you got on or off. It'd be a number of locations, and those are you have to work them. And I think somebody mentioned the engineering issues, but we have to make sure that the spacing between the actual interchanges and how you get on and off, because these would be, you'd have to get to them from the left lane, the left travel lane. So you need enough room to get onto Route 3 and then move over to the left lane safely. So they're going to be located, around a quarter of a mile, half a mile from an interchange, and then that's where the entrance would be. And similarly, when you're getting off, it has to give you enough room to safely get out of that lane and then move over if you're getting off Route 3 at that point. So those are the things we'll show in a lot more detail and kind of a little bit down the road. But those are certainly the issues we're looking at.
Thank you. That was obviously an important question for my town. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Bob Foltz. I'm the Community Development Director and Planning Director for the Town of Hull. Thanks again for your presentation and for putting some effort into helping us solve the problem of this Route 3. I had one alternative that I thought maybe you've probably already looked at is just repairing and improving the Braintree split. I know that's been under study for quite a while. I think the price range was in the $40 million range. Something like that. And I think we could all agree that the split is really the cause of a lot of the problems we have. The other point I'd like to make is on the environmental issues. There was no discussion or even a line item on greenhouse gas emissions. I think we all have to be concerned about that now. Certainly with the climate changing and as unsettled as it's becoming, we do need to address that issue in a forthright way. And in addressing that issue, we should be looking at connections to ferry and train transit, which we already have very large investments in. That seems to be a sidebar in your project here, and it should be central to it. Perhaps we could improve Route 3A and connections to train and ferry as well. And provide the benefits that public-private partnership has in terms of capital. I just think that, and you've heard it before, is that private interests are for the stockholders. They tend to be shorter term. The capital is there. That's a benefit. But infrastructure is certainly a long-term issue. And we have to keep that in mind, and maybe your lawyers can work some magic to make it come out right. The other thing is the examples that you cited, I don't know how old is the oldest one?
The Indiana Toll Road was leased in 2006. The I-495 Capital Beltway managed lane opened in November of 2012.
So this is really at the experimental level at this point.
I would not agree with that, because there have been lots of transactions that have taken place in between in California, in Texas, and Florida. I can get a list to you of those transactions that have taken place where managed lanes have been built and run successfully. What I'm giving you was the older example of a toll road being leased and the newer example of the most recent managed lane that was opened up. In between, there have been quite a few other examples, and I'm glad to get you that information.
Okay. Well, it sounds like there are some lessons to be learned.
There are.
At least. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Erna Lauder, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen from Hingham, and I want to thank you all for coming. I think everybody's leaving with more questions than they came with, which is not a bad thing. And I also want to make available and invite you back to Hingham and offer you the facilities we have here. I think this is a nice central place, and we'd like to have you back. And I'm sure we'll have more questions for you.
And I'm sure we'll be back.
Excellent. See, we're now on TV. They committed. Excellent. So thank you.
So I know we're we're slightly past our time, so we want to be respectful of everyone's time. I think we have 2 last questions, but if anyone has just a short one, I think we can try to accommodate that, so please come up. Great.
Hi, I'm Andrea Young, and I'm a Hingham resident, and thank you for coming today. It's really nice to have you here so that we have an opportunity to listen to this potential project. My concern, or my question really is, it's my understanding that the Greenbush ridership has not met its projections, leaving far more cars on the road than anticipated. So my question is, as the gentleman before Irma spoke, will the study of the impact on the ridership of Greenbush be included in your studies?
I can't say yes or no, but it's certainly something that we will consider based on the fact that you're bringing it up. We'll bring that up internally and try to come up with something that is satisfactory. That's the best thing I can tell you right now, but I can't tell you that we've considered that necessarily up until now.
I've heard a couple of other people mention that same issue today, and so my concern would be the investment that's been made in the Greenbush line and making sure that there's no significant impact.
Fair point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not the environmental expert, but I believe as part of the environmental review process, we would look at the impacts on alternate modes of transportation. I think that's part of the requirement. So I think we would assess those impacts.
My name is Carlton Allen Chambers. I live here in Hingham. I'm a common garden variety citizen. When the expressway was built, I lived in Norwell, and it was very exciting. We waited to see that 20-minute trip to Boston come to life, and of course it never did. One of the big mistakes that I don't want to see continued, if possible, is Norwell at the time asked if they could not have an entrance and an exit because they wanted to retain the bucolic nature of the town. That was a big mistake. The net effect of that was exits 14 and 15 became your major exits for Scituate and Cohasset, both good growth areas, and drove an unusual amount of traffic down the street, which continues to this day. I would like to see the plan, which, by the way, I think is a good plan, and I think it makes sense, and it's good forward planning. I would like to see the plan include an entrance and an exit in the town of Norwell to feed South Marshfield and the towns of Scituate and Cohasset. And thank you very much.
Hi, good morning. Thanks very much for being here, and thanks very much for a very, very interesting presentation. I have some questions. My name is Martha Buick, and I live in Hingham, and I helped start the commuter boat 40 years ago. It'll be 40 years this year, and one person here has asked if you could make sure to take a look at the impacts on boat ridership as well as train ridership as part of the whole transportation service for the South Shore. But my overriding question about this is how this piece fits in with mobility beyond down to the Cape, onto Route 228 or 128, up to the Southeast Expressway. What concerns me is it seems to be only one piece of a whole Massachusetts-wide scenario. And in that regard, over the years, people have looked at other alternatives for this corridor, including putting the extension of the Red Line down to, I think, Weymouth and maybe beyond, and including, various and other types of scenarios. So what I wonder is whether during the environmental process or even during this preliminary stage, you would look at more than just this toll solution. and whether you might look at the other alternatives to the corridor. I think that's required by federal highway, but I'm just not sure at which stage that would take place. So, number one, what are the alternatives to this particular solution for this particular piece of a corridor, which is part of a greater, a sort of a greater area? The second thing is, because of technology today, we have a very different network of commuting, and at least 10% of the town of Hingham now has home-based businesses. What is the implication of the technology to the future of transportation? I think that has to be part of this scenario too. And then, having been involved with the Highway Department in years past and the reconstruction of the Southeast Expressway in '84, one of the big pieces of that was the design of a series of alternatives during construction, not just keeping the corridor open, but having an entire set of transit alternatives. And this is where I think Representative Cantwell brought up some, very good concerns. What worked well at that time was the bulking up of other corridors, for train, boat, whatever. And I think that in order to give the South Shore confidence that this fragile corridor can survive construction during a construction period, there has to be some evidence that there has been a very well-crafted set of transit alternatives or road alternatives or whatever. And then finally, what I'd just like to add is Plymouth is getting ready for Plymouth 2020, the 400th anniversary of the landing of the Pilgrims and so forth, a very significant historic time for this region. So I want you to be very careful to take a look at your sequencing and time so that all the tourists who will be coming in and the tourist traffic won't be given great additional problems, so we won't make it as hard to get to Plymouth then as it was in 1620. So thanks very much.
Thank you. So just to be respectful, I think we're going to have one last question here, and then we're going to just do a quick wrap-up.
I'll try to make this as quick as possible. Clark Frazier from Hingham. I'm sorry, can you hear me? I got put on traffic committee. Quick question is, would you consider also looking at just rebuilding the whole road and tolling everybody on the road? I know this would be politically unpopular. One concern I had is Seattle Times said the I-405 project, they're expecting the toll will be $10 for a managed lane, end to end. The other factoid was that they said more than 75% of their HOV lanes are failing the 45-mile-an-hour test. So I'd really ask a question about the feasibility and the practicality, and if you tolled the entire facility, then you wouldn't have an impact on public transportation. It would be positive. Thank you.
So again, thank you all for coming. Really want to thank the Department of Transportation for coming and giving this overview. As Dana said, we're hopeful that if this concept advances, this is sort of the first of many conversations about this. They have the website here. I think, Dana, you've committed to sort of putting more information about the project on the website, and about the process for folks to be available. We'll make sure that information is also linked to the South Shore Coalition website and for the emails that go out to the South Shore Coalition members. So again, thank you very much. I'd just like to introduce Emily Torres Cullinane, the coordinator, so she can give a little preview of other South Shore events.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I just wanted to invite you all. We have a legislative breakfast coming up in 2 weeks on Friday, April 10th. It's going to be at the Braintree Town Hall at 8:30 in the morning, and we have Representative Cusack from Braintree hosting us. It's our second annual, so I hope that, among the discussion will be this topic as well as other planning topics. I wanted to thank Hingham. Thank you so much for providing the space for today, and please sign the sign-in sheet and give us your email so that we can continue to send you updates. Thank you, everyone, for coming.